start by apologizing. I am quite confident the dog currently sleeping behind me will at some point start barking her head off, because that's what she does whenever I am involved in a hearing or presentation. Anyway, welcome to Patent Law 101 in the dating industry. My name is Aaron Jacobs. I'm a partner at the law firm of Prince LaBelle Ty, LLP in Boston, Massachusetts, where I do patent litigation. I'm a member of the bars of California and Massachusetts, but patent litigation is a nationwide practice. And so I've practiced in front of more than a dozen federal courts across the country, as well as several of the courts of appeal and the U.S. Supreme Court. I have personally litigated everything from mobile phone technology to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth standards to genetic testing, superconductors, and of course, online dating. I am sure a lot of you are thinking to yourselves, why do I care about online dating and patents? You know, how does patents affect online dating? The short of it is that, for example, I ran a search for some of the more well-known dating apps. And what you see scrolling across your case right now is a list of cases, just some of the cases that I found. Personally, my first case was Spark Networks versus Human Rainbow back in 2011, where I represented the owner of JDate.com when they sued OkCupid. More recently, I represented the defendant Muzz in Match versus Muzz, which was brought earlier this year. On that topic, please note, I am just speaking for myself and not any of my clients. I'm going to give you a brief overview of patents, sort of how you get them, et cetera, and then move on to some examples of patent litigation in the dating industry. So very briefly, what's a patent? In short, it is a government grant to an individual or entity that gives that individual or entity the right to exclude. That's it. It's the right to exclude others. And if you want to enforce that right, if you have a patent, have to go to the court. Nobody else is going to do it for you. How do you get a patent? You file an application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO or PTO, in a process called patent prosecution. The application that you file will include what's known as the specification. It's a written description of what you invented. It will include usually figures and drawings, and then it has claims. The claims are at the end of the patent when you finally get one, and they define what are known as the metes and bounds of your right to exclude, sort of like a land title. If you have a title to land, it defines the boundaries of your land. That's what the claims do. I'm just going to give you a very simple example. Let's say that you submit a patent for tables, and your specification describes every table imaginable. And you file a claim for saying, I want a claim for a table. Well, tables were known before you submitted your application. There's prior art, prior tables, and so you can't get that. So you add limitation, such as square tables. Each limitation that you add narrows the scope of your claim. So here we're talking about square tables, but those were known. So you add 4 legs. That was known. Okay, and you say, oh, well, I'll narrow it even further to say red tables. Your claim now requires that you establish that the accused product is a square 4-legged red table. And if the table is, for example, green, you don't have coverage over that. But of course, we are not here to talk about tables. We're here to talk about the dating industry. I apologize to Match, including Ben Setnick, who I know is a patent an IP attorney at Match, but we're going to talk a little bit about them because they have patents and because they've been somewhat active in the industry. They've sued 3 of their competitors recently. So I'm going to focus on one of their applications, originally filed by Tinder, and then use that to explain patent prosecution, patent litigation, and what are known as inter-parties reviews. So Tinder filed an application back in 2007. It updated that application in 2008, and then more significantly updated it in March of 2013. That March of 2013 date is likely the important one. It likely provides the priority date for the patents that come after. And the priority date is important because, as I said earlier, you can't cover things that come before. So if something came before March of 2013, then Tinder can't cover that. But if it comes after that, then Tinder could potentially accuse it of infringement. Tinder filed a more formal application in October of 2013, and it has since received a total of 4 patents from this application, all entitled Matching Process System and Method. So I'm going to use this application as an example. The claims that Tinder first submitted in October of 2013 were extremely broad and extremely simple. I recognize that it can be hard to read the text on here, and even if you did, it might be difficult to understand some of it. So I've already put my email address and phone number in the chat box. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share my slides and answer any questions you might have offline. But anyway, we see here Tinder's first claims. The examiner at the PTO rejected those claims in August of 2015. So it took about 20 months for that first office action. 20 months is actually a pretty common delay for the first action, but then usually things speed up a lot after that. And the examiner rejected those first broad claims as anticipated. So quick summary, anticipation is when a single piece of prior art discloses everything. In other words, there's something that came before the application priority date that discloses every element of the limitations you're trying to get in that claim. So think back to the table. If you claim just a table, well, there's a catalog that shows table. So you add square tables. Now, this catalog still shows square tables. So you add 4 legs. Now, this catalog still shows tables with 4 legs that are square. And so finally, you add red, trying to get around that prior art. So in this instance, the examiner said, well, everything you're trying to claim is disclosed by this Jansen's piece of prior art. So about a month later, November of 2015, Tinder amended its claims to specifically cover a number of things, and it narrowed its claims, as you can see here in the yellow highlighting, to include the swipe gesture. This is where Tinder's swipe gesture comes into the patents. Well, the examiner took another month and rejected the amended claims. Again, as anticipated by Jansen's. Back and forth this went with amendments and rejections. Finally, in 2016, Tinder got around the anticipation rejections, but the examiner then switched to what's known as obviousness. Obviousness, similar to anticipation, but in obviousness, you basically say, well, I've got this one piece of prior art that discloses most of what you're talking about. And it would have been obvious to combine it with these other things. Back and forth it went until finally, after 5 rejections and a total of 10 amendments, the examiner allowed the patent. But that wasn't the end of it, because before that patent issued, Match filed as what is known as a continuation. Basically, that's a request to get another patent from the same application. So long as you've got a pending application that hasn't yet finally issued, you can continue to request continuations to get more and more patents. It's quite actually common to get more than one patent off of a given application. I, for example, worked for an inventor who filed a total of 8 different applications, from which he received a total of 53 patents. That inventor ended up a billionaire, and a billion with a B, and a house adjacent to the Playboy Mansion in Los Angeles. That is another story for another day, but please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about that. It is an interesting one. Anyway, back to Tinder. Tinder's application, which again was filed in October of 2013, resulted in U.S. patent number 9733811, which means it is the 9,733,811th patent issued by the USPTO. To avoid having to say all those numbers each time, people in the patent practice typically just refer to the last 3 digits. So that is the 811 patent. But as I mentioned, Tinder filed a continuation. That continuation resulted in the 023 patent in May of 2018. But that wasn't the end of it, because 1 month before issuance, and actually after they'd been told they would get the patent, Tinder filed another continuation. That second continuation resulted in a 3rd patent, the 854 patent, which issued in February of 2019. Now, the claims of the patents naturally overlap. Again, they are identical other than the claims. It's the claims that differ between patents. And each of the patents had between 6 to 9 claims. I'm going to focus just on claim 1 of the 854 patent. It is an impressive 500 words. And even just reading my summary here would take longer than we have. So I'm going to give you the very quick, very dirty version. You show potential matches to multiple users. The users swipe one way to indicate approval, swipe the other way to indicate disapproval, only allow mutual matches to talk, and continue to show potential matches. Again, I know there's a lot going on the screen here. Feel free to reach out if you want copies of the presentation or just have any questions. So this brings us to Match versus Bumble, which is probably something you've heard of before. I want to put up some dates on the screen here, and I want you to look at these dates. Tinder filed its application in March of 2013 and filed the claims in October of 2013. The Bumble app launched in December of 2014. Match acquired Tinder in July of 2017, and 1 month later the patent issued. And then Match sued Bumble in March of 2018. Think about this timeline. Tinder was seeking this patent at the time the Bumble app was out. So Tinder presumably drafted its claims with Bumble in mind. And it sounds weird, but that is perfectly acceptable. You can draft your claims to cover an existing product so long as your application predates the product. The other 2 patents issued during the course of the litigation. And again, my hunch is those patents were drafted with Bumble in mind and then added to the litigation. So while that was happening, and in response to Match's lawsuit, Bumble filed 4 inter partes reviews against Match's 3 patents. Now, this is something IPRs could get their own entire presentation. I'm going to try to give you the 30-second version. In short, anyone at any time can file an inter partes review challenging a patent out of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Basically what you do is you go and you say, hey, PTO, you should not have issued this patent because these claims are anticipated or rendered obvious by this prior art that you didn't consider. The PTO will then look at your petition and say, yeah, let's take a look at this in depth, we'll make a decision, or no, we're not going to look at it. If the PTO institutes the petition, then basically the petitioner and the patentee have a mini invalidity trial. And at the end of it, the PTO will issue a final written decision. In that final written decision, the PTO can choose to invalidate claims it had previously issued. The statistics differ from year to year, but generally about 70% of IPRs are instituted. And then of those that make it to final written decision, about 70% of those end up with all claims invalidated. Between September of 2019 and March of 2020, all 4 of Bumble's IPRs were instituted. This was bad news for Match. The odds were fairly good that it was going to lose some or potentially all of its claims that it had brought against Bumble. Perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not. 3 months later, Match and Bumble agreed to dismiss their district court litigation. Bumble then dismissed its IPRs before the PTO had a chance to issue final written decisions on those 3 patents. So both sides put down their swords. But that's not the end of it. About 7 months after that, Match sued what was then known as MuzMatch for infringement of those same 3 patents, as well as for infringement of the Match trademark. Now, I did not represent MuzMatch in that case, so I can only speak to it at sort of a high level. But I can tell you that Match accused MuzMatch's interface of using a swipe gesture. You can see that here in paragraphs 42 and 43. It says Match users gesture to the left and right on cards. Gesturing to the left indicates the user is not interested, while gesturing to the right indicates that the user is interested. This litigation went on for about 9 months, after which the parties agreed to dismiss that litigation. MuzMatch changed its name to Muz and changed its user interface a bit, including getting rid of the swipe gesture. Instead, Muzz switched to a tap gesture, where you tap a heart or an X, depending on whether you want to like or dislike somebody. And keep that in mind, because that still wasn't the end of it. If you think back to what I said earlier about the 3 patent applications, the 3 patents, that 3rd patent issued in February of 2019, and just 1 week before that, Match filed a continuation. That continuation, again, filed in February of 2019, was rejected a total of 8 times, which is more, I think, than I've seen any patent rejected in litigation that I've been involved with. But finally, in August of 2022, the PTO allowed that next patent, the 4th patent. The 666 patent, and as a fan of Phantom of the Opera, I love that number. The 666 patent issued on November 29th of 2022. The claim is an impressive 718 words, which is very long for a claim. It is similar to some of the other claims, including the one I summarized previously, but there are some key differences. First, the graphical representation of matches must be made as cards on a stack of cards. Second, the first user's interest in the second user must be anonymous and not communicated to that second user until there's a mutual match. And third, and this is key, the gesture indicating a preference for another user must be a dragging or tapping gesture, not a swipe gesture. So think back to what I said about the end of the Match versus Muzz match litigation. At the end of that litigation, Muzz changed its user interface from a swipe to a tap. And think about the timeline. Match submitted this application in February of 2021 while it was suing Bumble, before it sued Muzz match. This litigation was going on, the Muzz match litigation was going on at the time the patent was being prosecuted. And it was being prosecuted to go after the altered user interface. So what happened? Match sued Muzz for patent infringement of the 666 patent, alleging infringement by the new user interface. As you can see here, the first gesture comprising a dragging or tapping gesture, indicating a positive preference for the second user. I can't get into the details, but we were hired, my firm was hired to represent Muzz in that litigation. We looked into the patent, we looked into the Muzz app, we spoke with Match's outside counsel several times and explained to Match that Muzz's app did not infringe for a variety of reasons. 3 months later, before Muzz had to file an answer, before we had to file any sort of official response, Match agreed to dismiss that case. But that's still not the end of it. Think back what I said about the 666 patent, which issued in November of 2022, because just 1 week before that patent issued, Match filed a continuation. The application filed in November of 2022. You can see the claim here. Again, reach out to me if you want a copy of the slides. The claim was rejected in April of this year. And then about 2 weeks ago, there was what's known as an examiner interview, during which time the examiner and Match's counsel spoke by telephone. There was discussion regarding the prior art, a few other things. No resolution was had, but Match's time to file another amendment, to make changes, etc., to respond to the rejection has not yet passed. And so we can assume, like a good patentee, Match will try and try again. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Aaron.
Sure thing.
If you've got any questions, would you mind putting them into the Q&A section? And I'll read them off as you enter them. There we go. We've got a couple. So Peter Christian Filipina asks, can Match prevent other companies from using matching technology that is not facially visible, but only somehow in use in servers by competitors?
Yes, it's a good question. So patents are what's known as strict liability. It doesn't matter if you knew about something or not. If you infringe a patent, you infringe a patent, and the person who holds that patent can seek to stop you, can seek to get damages from you. If you knew about the patent, then you're subject to potentially higher damages. But yes, if Match or any other company has a patent that covers the servers, etc., then they could come after you. My hunch is that Match doesn't have patents covering the servers themselves, but it wouldn't surprise me, for example, if Cisco or other companies do have patents that cover sort of the very back end processing things. So yes, there's always that possibility.
Okay, thank you. And Brad Jones from Meet Kingsters asks, it seems Match in these examples is employing the tried and true tactic of grinding their competitors into submission by burial in paperwork and disproportionate resources to continue borderline frivolous litigation. Is this just what to expect?
Yeah, there is certainly an argument to be made that this was competition by other means. As attorneys, we have an obligation to look into things. I represent plaintiffs frequently, and so I can't submit a complaint. I can't submit the document that starts a case without a good faith belief in the underlying facts and theory. And so I would like to think that Match's attorneys looked at the user interface and said, okay, we have a good faith reason to believe that Muzz's user interface infringes. When we came in, we did a very deep dive, and we came to the conclusion that no, there is no reasonable way to believe that this infringes. And so we pushed back. You basically, in this sort of situation, need to rely on sort of the good faith of counsel, which I know can be difficult. But again, we have our ethical obligations, and if you can establish solidly that you don't infringe, you can try to go with that.
Gotcha. And Jay asks a great question from Blazer. Many apps have the swipe feature. Are they all violating Tinder's patent?
Depends on if you talk with Tinder's counsel or me. Let me switch back to, I'm just trying to find the summary of, here we are. This is on your screen now, the claim 1 of the 854 patent, and I will acknowledge this is my summary of the 854 patent claim 1, which is 500 words long. It's a doozy. The claim doesn't cover just swiping. It includes swiping. But as I said earlier, every limitation further limits the scope of the claim. So in this instance, you need to, and this covers the back end. This covers Tinder's, for example, system. Tinder has to receive profiles, limitation A. Tinder has to receive requests for a match. Tinder has to identify matches, etc. If you do each of the things listed in the 12 limitations, then yes, Tinder might have the right to come after you. One of those requirements is indicating a preference by swiping. So if your app includes swiping, then you need to consider it.
Let me just throw in a question here. What should a company budget typically to defend against potential patent infringement? What, I mean, how long is a piece of string, basically? But I mean, if we were to budget and say, okay, we're starting up, maybe we'll encounter patent infringement at some stage. We'll think we're good, but we should probably have a budget just in case. What should they throw into the kitty a year into operations, you know?
Well, it's going to depend on a lot of things. So it's going to depend on your counsel. there are different billing rates.
Let's say you.
But yeah, me.
Yeah.
It depends on the number of patents. It depends on the nature of the industry. But I can tell you that patent litigation is comfortably one of the top 2 or 3 most expensive things out there. I mean, it can easily run you just like a single patent case. I'm thinking back, there was a study done, I think in 2020, and a single patent case can comfortably run $1 to $2 million, and a multi-patent case can run $1 to $4 million from beginning to end. That's why, and that's true for both plaintiffs and defendants. Patent litigation is very expensive.
Good God.
And so
that's a bigger number than I was thinking. I was thinking, okay, a couple of $100,000 maybe, but my goodness. So if we're talking, a startup coming out the gate, they've got a $500,000 bag, they're making money, they're 2 years, a year into ops, and they get slammed with a patent infringement. It's game over, isn't it?
It can be. And it's important to pick good counsel. Now, depending upon the nature of the patent, depending on what court you go to, it can be more, it can be less. This is a reason, for example, that, and as I mentioned earlier, it's expensive on both sides of the ball. But a lot of plaintiffs will do contingency litigation of some variety.
I see.
Where the counsel will agree to reduce or eliminate fees in return for getting some portion of the recovery. But yeah, there's really no way around it. Patent litigation can be very expensive.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of companies view it as competition by other means.
But also on the other side of the table, a larger incumbent is going to pick their fights carefully. I mean, they want it to have an impact on the industry in terms of making an example, I would assume, and also that they would want to carry it to fruition rather than just have the sails lose all of their wind halfway through the battle. That doesn't make a good example, does it? So,
no, it doesn't. And there can be a variety of rationales that any party brings to the table.
Gotcha. I'm hogging your time. I'm going to how much time do we have? We're at half an hour. Can we go an extra few minutes?
I'm happy to, sure.
Cool.
My dog's still sleeping, so
quite a few questions coming in, funnily enough. Let's have a look. Do vote these up. We're going to have time for all of them. So please, if you have a chance, can you go in and just vote these up and help me out a bit? So I'm going to, Mark has answered. There we go. We've got Daniel up top here. Daniel, who is CEO founder of Fields. So many apps look exactly like Tinder and could be taken to court by Match. How can they explain that they only go after Muzz? Okay. I mean, that kind of based on what we were just talking about, but maybe you could enhance on that. How do they pick
really is. I mean, it's one of those things where, a patentee, the patent holder, let's say Match, is entitled to damages in the form of a not less than a reasonable royalty, or actual sort of lost sales. So if a small player is out there and they've got, $100,000 a year, or $100,000 a month worth of subscriptions or whatever else, Match is going to look at that and go, okay, it's going to cost us $500,000 just to get to the point of bringing the case and then litigating the case. It's not worth it to us for that relatively small player, because let's say I can get, 10 cents at most per subscription. We're talking, $10,000 a month. That's not handy. That's not useful to us. Whereas when you've got Match versus Bumble, sure, that makes sense. I'm sure Bumble is making money hand over fist. And so if Match is able to win, it's looking at a potentially significant recovery. Conversely, Match also has to consider its own risk in this, in that if Match loses, if the IPRs succeed, or if Bumble wins in the litigation, either establishing non-infringement or that the claims are invalid, then Match loses the value of its patents.
Oh, that's another avenue we should go down. That's really interesting. So if they lose in court, then that's the precedent and it becomes an undefensible in context, it's undefensible as a patent?
Yes, no. So let's take Match versus Bumble, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say at the end of Match versus Bumble, if they had gone all the way to trial, and at the end of trial, the jury concludes Bumble does not infringe, but the claims are valid. Okay, Bumble is free and clear. Match gets to keep its patents. Nobody else can use the verdict in favor of Bumble. Like you can't say, well, my product is exactly the same, therefore I win. It's not that simple.
Okay.
However, if the claims were found invalid, if the jury said, no, all these claims are invalid, or if Bumble succeeded in its IPRs, it took it all the way to the end of the IPRs, final written decision, claims are invalidated, that invalidation is good for everybody. So
Gotcha.
that is why, you'll see sometimes patentees, once an IPR is instituted and they're at risk of losing their patents, that is some amount of leverage that the defendant in that case has.
Thank you. We've got Jay from Blazer. Do attorneys scan through dating app and social networking terms and privacy policies, looking for potential loopholes to bring lawsuits and class action lawsuits against these companies?
I have never done so. It wouldn't surprise me if there's somebody out there doing that. I guess I wouldn't know what sort of loopholes they'd be looking for. If I was going to bring a new case based on patents, certainly I would be looking through that sort of thing. But I'm not aware of any such class actions.
All right. Okay, so we've got Jay Lindbergh. I don't know, of course. Okay. All right. Jimmy Forrester from Rocketware. If challenged, would you have the chance to make changes rather than fight the case?
It depends on the nature of the change. So again, you need to establish every single one of those limitations. And again, we still have claim 1 of the 854 patent up. And it requires all of these things to happen. And one of those things is, as it says here, the swipe gesture, swipe left, swipe right. So you need to make a decision. Okay, if I think I do all of these things, maybe I should switch from swiping to tapping. Okay, certainly an option. But then potentially you don't infringe this patent, you instead infringe the next patent. Then you need to look at these different limitations. This one requires some of the same stuff. The 666 patent doesn't require swiping. Instead, it requires a tapping gesture. Okay, if I switch to tapping, great. That'll get me out of the first 3 patents, but not the 4th patent. But then I look at this and I say, first user's positive preference for the second user. Okay, boy's interest in girl is anonymous, such that girl is not made aware of boy's expressed interest for girl until after determination of mutual interest in each other. Okay, so maybe I use tapping rather than swiping to get out of the first 3 patents, and then I don't keep boy's interest in girl anonymous. I put that right out front. I make sure girl, second user, knows about the interest. Then maybe I've gotten out of the patent.
Great.
So it's, how much value does swiping give your app? Do you believe that your app is that much more popular, that much more valuable due to the swiping? And then you just need to make a balanced decision.
I've often thought that swiping seemed a little strange to go from left to right. It would actually in some ways be more logical, you would think, to bring someone you're interested in towards you. Keep her, send away, keep, send away.
But that's still a swiping gesture. Swiping can be, it doesn't, the patent doesn't say.
On swiping, not left to right.
I would have to, I'll acknowledge, I have to look back into
Okay.
it because I was
All right.
focused on the 666 patent, which doesn't have swiping.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the claims. Do they simply say, as I recall, different directions?
Yeah.
And is,
Ah,
does the specification, you can't look, you need to read the claims in light of the specification.
yeah.
And does it say that swiping has to be left or right, or is it agnostic? Does it not matter?
I've got another great question from Richmond. Thank you. From Couplet. He's asking, is it still worth it for startups to file their own patents if they can't defend it from competitors due to funds, if it costs so much to defend?
That's certainly a good question. Obtaining patents is certainly cheaper than patent litigation. Depending upon counsel and how long it takes, that can be anywhere from, say, 15 to 20,000 up to, tens of thousands, potentially 100,000. I will tell you, for example, that pharmaceutical companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and are gleeful to do it to get good patents. So patent prosecution itself is not cheap. It is relatively cheap to litigation. In terms of getting them, because you can't defend it, that's where it's a little easier to fund affirmative litigation. So for example, if you have a patent that and again, I apologize to Match. If you have a patent that you think Match infringes, if your patent really covers what they do, you probably won't have difficulty finding counsel who will say, yep, I will represent you on contingency, and I will go after Match. I just get some portion of the recovery.
I see.
If you have a patent that covers MUDs, my client was a smaller player. And so that would be a more challenging proposition if you don't have the funds to fund that litigation yourself.